Okay, so it's class time. Let's just say week 4. You guys are in week 4 now. Sorry. 4. So welcome to week 4 of class. So this is the next to last week of the official lectures. We're almost done. I know last week was quite challenging, but thank you all for submitting homeworks. You had a really good submission rate. We're waiting on just 1 or 2 more people. I won't name names. But don't feel discouraged. We're almost to the top of the mountain. So just a quick recap of what we learned last week. Last week was a really important week for advanced React topics. So we'll be using more of these topics this week. Whether you realize or not, we'll be using a lot of compound functions and higher order components. Sorry, I should say compound components. And just I'd like to reiterate, like as we get into more and more advanced of topics, it's going to be harder. You might have questions like, should I do it like this or should I do it like this? And that's up to kind of the software engineer part of you to know when to make that judgment call. So when do I make a new component? Or when do I use this Redux pattern? Or when do I use not Redux pattern? Which is what we'll learn today. But a good rule is I think we've established that no one likes long, complicated code. So we'll do our best to make things short and simple as we move on. So speaking of homework from last week, Hui, what were our best homeworks?
Yeah, we have 2 best homework. And
he went to open the door. So let's wait for him to come back.
it's open door. It's awesome. He used the
Nobody?
Victor.
Oh, Victor. Okay. So Alex, good job. You made the best homework for this week. What do you like about it, Hui?
Answer.
I love the UI. It's awesome.
It's good.
The internet is a bit slow, so.
And he had charts and the list of payments and have the refund.
Wow.
It's awesome.
That's lots.
It's
Ooh.
something. It's cool, huh?
Very good. And then we had a second best homework, which was
Yeah.
also very good.
Từ, right?
Where's Stone? Not here.
He didn't come.
Yeah. No clapping. Don't clap. No one clap. No. No, but it's also very good, right?
Yeah. Check out us and we also have analyzed the graph.
Oh, we did the graph.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
And also for refund.
So yeah, hopefully this gave you a good experience in working with an API. Like I said, Stripe API is good, and now you can tell everyone that you know how to use it. So it'll be a good life skill for you in the future. Thanks, Pete. All right, so this week I'm going to do the format a little bit differently. We'll do discussion after a little bit of intro to the topic we're learning today, because the topic we're learning today is a little bit, it's a lot to learn. But it's not difficult, it's just a lot, totally new kind of way to think. So I know we've been forcing you to think differently the past 4 weeks. Now there's another kind of layer on top of that, and that's called Redux. So what is Redux? So has anyone here heard of Redux? Or I'm sure, John, you've heard of Redux. You might even know how to use it. Have you used Redux before?
Yes, actually I use it for a lot. In the first time we need Redux. That's quite hard for everyone.
It's hard to learn at the beginning, I think. But it's a very in-demand skill, the last bullet point there. So if you work in React as a professional engineer, companies will probably expect you to use Redux or something similar to it. What is it? It's a library that you use with React. So people often ask, what's the difference between AngularJS and React.js? And one answer that people often give is that React is just a view library, and Angular is a whole framework. So if you really want to compare, you should actually maybe think about comparing Angular with Redux. Because Redux gives more structure, it's more of a framework that you use with React. It's still not as heavy as Angular, in my opinion. But it's just a way to kind of organize data and make cleaner, nicer software that all follows a specific pattern. And I would say Redux is probably the most commonly used of all the options. So the other one you might hear a lot is something called Flux. So if you read the Facebook documents, Facebook will say, you should use this thing called Flux with React. But it's often very confusing, especially for beginners, because there's no like Flux library. You can't do npm install Flux, not really, because it's an architecture. So Facebook has some pieces that they publish that explain how they fit in terms of this architecture, but it's really kind of like a higher level thing, like MVC. There's no MVC library you download, right? It's just a way to organize your application, and Flux is a word that also describes something high level like that. Redux is the implementation of that higher level recommendation. So it's like what Ruby on Rails or .NET is to MVC. And of course, Ruby on Rails will do things differently than .NET, but they're still both MVC-inspired frameworks. And Redux is the most simple, I think, of all the implementations, which is why it's favored. And you can use this architecture on both, of course, native and web. Man, this doorbell keeps ringing. Another tea. The person who's most last should go open the doorbell for the next person. Right. So one of the most intimidating things about Redux, the name itself is kind of scary, I don't know why, but there's all these big words and terminology that you have to learn. And they sound scary, but they're not very difficult. So the top three are the ones that pertain to this library. It's actions, reducers, and store. And I'll go through and explain each one individually. Hey, we should have Evelyn come in. Hey, Evelyn, can you come in for a second? Can you ask her to come in for just 1 second?
Hello?
The girl just walked in.
Evan?
Evelyn.
Hello.
Yeah.
You want to come in?
Okay.
She's eating.
Okay, when you're done, come. I just want to introduce her real quick, but we'll do it later. She has a very special job at Coder School. So actions, reducers, store. The view is just referring to everything that you've done so far already. So this is your web page or your app that has buttons and stuff on it. So these three pillars of Redux, actions, reducers, and store. I'll start with the store. So I'm going to continue to use my Simpsons cartoons. I don't know if anyone here watches The Simpsons. It's too old for most people, but I'm old. So store is where all of our data comes. So it's the single source of truth for application. So right now, the way you might use your application, you have lots of components. And sometimes you have state in separate components, like your movie card might have some state, your text field might have some state. When we move to the Redux world, most of it, if not all of it, should come from somewhere called the store. And you can think of a store like a store. Like it's a confusing word, but like it's a store that has lots of stuff in it. And you go and get stuff out of the store. This is like your database for your front end, basically. Now, you can go into the store and take things out. So you do that with actions, or you make things change. So you have some data, like maybe your movie list or your current page, or liked or unliked. All that stuff lives in the store, and you have actions that change those things. And the terminology is that you dispatch actions. That means like send actions. So you also hear the terms dispatch, subscribe, all these different words, but they just mean to send actions to people. And the most scariest sounding word of all of them is something called a reducer. So last time Jiren gave an example of a reducer. So he talked about higher order functions like map and filter, and then he did something called reduce at the very end. That was like the grandfather of all functional programming. So this is named after the same kind of principle, which is just a function that does something. That's all it is. So it describes what happens because of an action. So I might have an action, for example, like user logged in. And the reducer is going to do something to this, actually going to change the store or change the state of the application as a result of the action. So they all sound very similar, but they're very specific things. This is the behavior, this is the thing that actually happened, and this is the place where everything lives. And the question is, why do we separate an application out like that? And one thing is it's very convenient to have one source of truth for the application. So there's one place where everyone can go and get the relevant data for the application. So two people cannot disagree. One component over here, one component over here. They're both reading from the same place. they cannot get out of sync with each other. So you'll see that sometimes, like in jQuery land or something, you'll hit a button and it'll update in one place, but you need to update in like 2 or 3 other places. For example, like add to cart. You hit add to cart, it says cart item added. But now you also have to remember to increase the counter in the upper right for how many items you have in cart, lots of things. You no longer have those kinds of problems. And also just gives you another way to separate code. So you have your code that's focused around storing stuff, focused on changing stuff, focused on defining what those changes can be or what changes can happen. So it's another way to separate your code. And the last part is like a pro and con. So sometimes if you separate your code a lot, you'll end up having kind of repeated code or stuff that's just like very repetitive. And we call that boilerplate because we have the same like kind of basic structure across many different files. You'll see there's a little bit of structure, but it ends up making it easier to follow and debug. You'll see, oh, this happens, so now this is here. So it becomes nice and becomes easier to, I think, debug and deal with complicated applications. And there's one more here, which I didn't put, but it's also easy to, if you have a complicated application, so you can do bookmarks and like history, like back and forth, undo, redo. These kinds of things become very easy if you have Redux. So if you have an application that has very advanced interactivity needs, Redux makes it much easier. So that was very abstract, and that was very, very quick to explain what Redux is. So I'll do our favorite thing, which is to do a code walkthrough. And I'll just walk through the basics of Redux. And what we're going to build is very similar to, so the Redux homepage is really well written. And I put links to these things. There's free videos here. Don't get scared that there's 30 of them. They're all very short. So it's like they're only 2 or 3 minutes short each.
One question with like Create React App.
Yes.
Does that, like when you use Create React App, you don't need Redux?
It does not include Redux. It's not included at all. So like Redux is completely optional. Up till now, you've been building beautiful homeworks without the idea that this thing existed. So it's totally okay. But hopefully today's lecture will show you, oh, here's another way to do it, and here's cases where you'll find this to be helpful.
And it sounds like big applications or big startups
Will
would
use this.
use this.
Yes.
Because
It helps you keep track of your application state better. So if you have the 2 main pros to me is like you have all your data in one place. So everyone knows what's going on all the time. So like you can't screw up. It's hard to get your application out of sync. So if one person's working on this thing, one person's working on this thing, they still have like one place where everyone agrees, I would say. Also, once you have lots of different state changes happening, it gets hard to track what's happening to your application. So you have a button, you have a text field, all these things, all these set states. Maybe as you're debugging your homeworks, you do a set state, you're like, wait, it's not updating. Why isn't it updating? Or wait, how did that update? Those kinds of things. Those will happen. Those will still happen, but you'll now have better insight into when those things happen with Redux. And I would say actually in the professional world, I don't know if this is really true, but my feeling is most people actually start with Redux. We didn't want to teach you this from the beginning, because you need to understand the basics, but after you learn this kind of pattern, you'd go with this by default for everything that you do. And okay, like I said, there's some videos here. Of course, with any framework, there's lots of advanced techniques and things you can do. I tried my best to make the examples today as simple as possible. So I'm not trying to use a lot of built-in fancy bells and whistles. This will be kind of as close to the bare metal as I can get. But the example that Redux goes, it's to make a counter. So a little button that goes like +1, and you said you press me 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. So that's the example I'll try to build for you guys today. But I'm trying to make it more fun, so people stay awake. Let's see if I'm successful. Okay, so here's the code thing. So to answer Oscar's question, so I did create React. Oh, it's too small. I did create React app. So then I had to do 2 more things: yarn add React Redux, and I should do yarn add Redux. Sorry, I did yarn add React. That's not what I should have done at all. Okay. And then start. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to build the counter application. I'll build it the way that we're used to doing it with set state. And I'll have you guys walk me through this. This will also be a good chance to review the basics of components and props and those things. So I might pick on you, Victor. Anyone who looks very confused, you have a very confused look on your face. So you're asking for it. Okay, so let's just delete all this stuff. Let's see, sorry, this is the top one. And let's do. So you press me this time, press me like this. How would I, I'll introduce you in like 10 minutes when I'm done with this. I'll introduce you in a few minutes. So. Okay, so how would I make this button do something fun? What's the first step? I want it to say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 as I press this button. Where would you suggest I start? Good idea. Like this? And then qua, what's next? Yeah. Okay. Victor, how do I make this say you press me 0 times?
You put a listener on the plate.
So let's not hook up the button yet. I just want to hook up this, instead of saying question, how do I make it say 0? I can do this, but not that.
Counter. I mean, you put it in the counter instead.
Yeah, how do I put the counter in here?
Curly braces, counter.
This? Your fist bump was premature. But no, this is, yeah, so we do this to say the counter, you press it 0 times. But now, Sam, how do I make this button do something? Yeah, we can do that. I'm going to be lazy and just do this like this. I'll do it. You can do it anonymous like this. Like this. Sorry. You can do a new function called handle, or you can just do it in line like this. So I'll do it this way. Good job. Hopefully that was really easy for everyone, right? Now think back to week 1. This would have seemed so crazy that this would work. Now it's in your sleep. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to rewrite this in Redux, basically. So we're going to have a different way that we dispatch actions. In Redux, you try to really avoid using this .state. And to answer Oscar's question from earlier, this is how you get in trouble in basically in React, is if you over abuse this .state. Because you have lots of little components and each of them has their own this .state. It can get easy to like forget, why is this state here, why is this state here? So we're going to try to do away with this. So I warned you that there's some boilerplate going on. So we're actually going to edit index.js, and we're going to import some high-level things here. So we'll do so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap this app in something called provider. Sorry. This is a compound component, if you remember before. So wrapping app in provider will give app a whole bunch of superpowers. And you can look at this provider code from before. This is kind of what Jiren did last week. And what we need to do though is we need to pass it a store object where all of our stuff lives. And I'll put null and make sure that I did this wrong.
Remove the error from
There's a typo.
I think this,
The next to that app, the largest sound.
Yeah, maybe I'll check that. Oh. I can't do this. I take away of state, so I'll change this around. So we wrap things in provider, but you have to pass it a store. So you shouldn't do null for store. You actually have to make an object called store. And you can do that using something I just imported. Any guesses? Yeah. So yeah, create store. So create store does take an argument, and it takes an argument that's a function. So we'll pass it a function. And the function that it takes will take two arguments, state. So I mentioned before that there are stores, actions, and reducers. So store is built of reducers. So arguments I give into it will be reducers, and reducers explain what happens when actions happen. So it's just a set of functions. So I'm going to pass one function, and I'll say, for example, if action.type equals increment state plus 1. So the body of this is a reducer. So a reducer is the behavior that happens in response to an action. So I'm saying, okay, given our current state and given an action, what do I do? Okay, well, right now, there may be other actions out there, but right now I'm looking at something called increment for incrementing a counter. And if that happens, I'll return state plus 1. Otherwise, I'll just do nothing, return state. That's all. Good question. Someone make a noise. And also, it's customary to do that, so to give an initial state, because when you first start, you don't know what it is. So we need to say, for us, we're going to start our counter at 0, so just pass counter equals 0. And now this is what we pass into store.
Wait, what are you setting as 0 here? Because you're not setting counter, you're just setting.
Yeah, so right now, like we could
Okay.
my state is just a number right now.
Yeah.
So it's structured a little differently than before, but you'll see why in a second. So we start with 0. If we receive an action of type increment, we'll return 1. After that, 2, 3, 4, 5. Otherwise, return the current state. And now it's all wrapped up in that. And in order to make a component's Redux aware, or like that knows about the state, you can tell each component, hey, here's where you get the state from, or the store from. And do that with something called connect. And you'll do something down here. So you do, instead of just exporting default app, let's connect. So this is a higher order component. So this is like the with stripe data, for example. This is provided by React Redux. And we call it connects. And it takes 2 arguments.
You give it a second and with import connect.
Oh, yes, thank you. And it takes 2 arguments. It can be null, but that's not useful. So the first one is what we'll look at. It's called map state to props. And that's we have to make that. So the map state to props is just a function that takes state and returns an object. What do we call it? So when I say connect, I'm saying connect our app to the Redux store, but then it's connected via props. So the Redux magic will generate a whole bunch of props for a component and pass them down from the store. But I need to kind of map one to another. So what we call this counter. So right now our state is just number. So we'll assign it to the prop called counter. So now I can do this, let's say this dot props. Or actually, sorry. Let's ignore this long click now, press me this props. Reload this, I should see 0 times. So we are now doing stuff via props. There's no set state logic in here directly. But we want this to change. So instead of doing on-click this dot set state, what we'll do is we'll do on-click. Where's my mouse? On-click. This dot props to this page. So we're going to dispatch an action of type increment on click. And don't worry about where this dispatch comes from. This is also part of the connect Redux stuff. Reload. Now it works magically. So it's the same way that we did this. Now, this is pretty shallow. We can only keep track of one thing at a time, but you can keep track of multiple things because we'll probably have more than just counters in our application. So how about as an example, we have increment, before I get there, let's change this button to increment me. So this button will increment me. Let's make another button called decrement me. So right now they're both do the same thing because we haven't changed this. What should we call this? Yes, easy. And now it will magically work. No, just kidding, it doesn't. Because, Sunny, what do you think I should write here?
If action not time
Sunny.
between
It's Sunny.
return state.
We can do else, but we don't need to. I mean, obviously, if it's
You can
Yes.
switch. You can switch.
yeah, it's actually common to do a switch here.
Action not time.
Yeah. So we'll just for now let's keep this way. Let's do the way it's easier to tell. So now it's sorry. I was excited. I thought you were saying something. But hopefully not.
Because you want to first the space is the -1.
Yeah, well, so we start at 0, and this one just decrements. So this returns the previous state -1, this returns the previous state +1. So all of our logic now lives here. So we have actions, different buttons, like this. First button will dispatch increment. The second button dispatches decrement.
Is there a reason why you put everything in index?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a kind of a convention. Actually, for real code, I would make its own file. I would make a file called actions.js. I'd also maybe make a file called reducers.js, store.js, depending on how complicated the logic is. And I just did all in action. It's not really, the reason I did that is it's not really part of app anymore. So app is like a component. This is for your, I guess, app, but for your whole like thing.
What about if I so many store?
It's a good question. So the question was, what if I have many stores? You can do that, but you almost should never do that. So the idea is that you do want one store because it becomes easy to manage. And JavaScript is efficient. I mean, depending on how much data you have, you can probably shove it in one store. There are some specialized applications where you have multiple stores. But Redux really champions the idea that you have one store. That keeps things much simpler.
When you say one store, is it one database?
It's like one database for your application. It's just UI information usually, so it's like it should be okay. But now you can kind of see how like we split logic up. It was very easy to make a decrement button. I feel like that was so much easier than before. But let's imagine we have a third button now. Or not a third button, let's say, sorry, so this says you've pressed me 1 times. That's not true. So this is like how many my count is, whatever. But my impress me. What if I wanted both buttons? I want to track both things at once, so not just one number, but two numbers, or like, infinite number of things. We're going to need more logic here. So we could just do other things here and make an object, or there's lots of weird things we could do. But the common thing to do is to make to split this up into separate reducers. So let's make this a new function called this first one's counter reducer. This is the function. This is the same thing as here. So no. And here we have like a second one called like pressed reducer. And what will this do? So I just want to count the number of times the buttons are pressed. So what should I do? It should be the same code or slightly different? Sun.
Sorry?
So I want to make one. This one's going to count like the up and down, plus minus, so increment, decrement. But I also want to know how many times the buttons have been pressed at all. Like,
just keep increasing.
Yeah, so let's do that. So no matter, for both actions now, we're just going to increase our count. Right. And then we now use a new thing called combine reducers. So I need to import that. It comes from Redux. Reducers. I pass these two reducers to it. Now I just create store with reducers. And now, so it's not the state anymore, it'd be state.counter reducer. And we have a new one called pressed, which is called state.pressed.
That's suppose you should remove the user inside the that means something like state.press.
We could also do that, yeah. I mean, I was actually thinking that. Maybe I shouldn't call this. Oh, yeah, sorry, you're right. Thank you. And now we can do this dot props. Amazing. So now our props, we have multiple pieces of data. So now you can imagine, like, you can also, it can be nested things. So you might have a user reducer that does all the user stuff. You have like a shopping cart reducer that does all your shopping cart stuff. I had a more interesting example for this. So let me change this. So I had a more. Does anyone here know, except for Oscar, does anyone here watch Rick and Morty? Oh yeah. 1, 2, 3. Yes. Okay. So I want to make a Rick and Morty app. It's called Show Me What You Got. Does anyone watch this show? Yes, okay, good. So the idea is that now I want to make the app, so if I got it, pass current sound, I want to change the picture. So I have more pictures here. So now I'm going to say, like, oh, if I get a score above 10, then I'll show something. If I get a score below -10, I'll show something different. So I could build this all onto our app.js, but then everyone would be mad at me and give me bad performance review or bad code review, so I'll make a new component. We can do import. New file. Show me, I mean, this is long. Dot banner. Show me what you got. Okay, so now it has. I'm going to copy and paste just 3 lines. So the 3 images I have. So you have, oops. So we have 3 different images based on if you show me not cool means you failed, and I like what you got means you were good. So I'll do something like if this dot props dot count is greater than 5, image equals like what you got image. If this dot props dot count is less than -5, not cool. And then return image. What do I put here? Either lum. What do I put here? I'm going to return image.
You are right. You object.
No, that's React Native. On web, you can just do this.
ING.
Yeah. It's a trick question. So now we have this awesome app. I got it. It didn't work.
You do the special property.
I forgot the passive property. Right. Count equals. What you got? Not cool. So I made this component because it was fun, but also because we just chose this Redux that has like a way of reading props. So for our app component, we aren't keeping any internal state. We're reading all of our state from this guy. I'm doing map state to props. So we read from the store. But I wanted to show you the example because just because one component is reading from the Redux store does not mean all of your components need to read from the Redux store. You should still keep your components as dumb as possible. So for this show me what you got banner, instead of passing this count, I could have had this guy read directly from the Redux store by doing this connect map state to props. But there's no real reason to do that. So I wanted to keep it as a dumb component and not do that. As a general rule, I would say if you have this kind of logic where you're dispatching things, or you want to change the state, then obviously you're going to have to use Redux, and that thing will have to be kind of aware. But even so, you can still use the same strategy that we've used for other applications where you pass functions as props down to your children to keep your children as dumb as possible. That still applies for Redux. Any questions about this? Hui, is there anything else you want to add about Redux?
No, actually, maybe I will happy with an example of how Redux can affect, like it's easier for debugging or something like that.
That's a good point. So actually, I've been telling you, and we just repeated that Redux is supposed to make it easier for debugging. Let me show you maybe one way it's easier for debugging. So let's say that something's not working right. I want to see what the current state of the application is. I said, hey, I have a store. All the stuff's in the store. So I should be able to go look at the store and see what's in there, and then hopefully from there I can figure out what's wrong with my application. So one really cool thing that you'll use a lot is that is something called middleware. If anyone here has anyone used like Express Node.js? This is also, if you've used Express Node.js, you use middleware a lot, and it's kind of a JavaScript thing. Middleware is software that kind of runs around things. It's very vague. But let me explain this. This is another kind of design pattern. Oh, my dog is on your backpack. So from Redux, we'll do so, sorry, let me scroll. Where's your mouse? Sorry, I put my notes real quick. I always forget the syntax from middleware. So create store actually takes a second argument, which can be middleware. But we have to define middleware first. And you can actually download packages. So one of the most popular packages you'll use is called Redux Logger. And this will give you a really nice output like this, but we'll just build this really quickly ourselves. So in production, you should use that package. Let me show you kind of what it looks like. So logger, I call it like ghetto logger. So middleware it's like a function that takes functions. It's a complicated thing, but there's three things you need to look at. So store is the current store, next is the next state of the store, and action is the thing that the action you're taking. So basically, the middleware can see everything and do things to it as necessary. So it can pre-process or like post-process things. But we'll use it right now to just log information about everything. The console.group is the thing that does just in console. It's just a debug command. That's over here. So everyone knows console.log. There's also a whole bunch of other things you can do. So console.group is one of them. And that gives you this thing. So we'll use that here. Console.group action type. We're just using it for debugging. So next here is like what happens as a result. So it's going to call your reducers for you, and it's going to calculate next when you call next. And we can print out the contents of the store by doing store.getState. We do group end just to close that arrow. But we need to make sure to return the results, and that way the change actually happens. But before we return it, we can actually like look at it, inspect it, do things to it. And if we do this in Python, so then we should be able to load our application again. Where's that function? What did I do wrong? So I'll hit I got it here. So imagine that scenario happens. There's many ways. I'm like, why does it say 8? I don't know. I don't remember what I pressed. React values. So it knows everything that happened. So there were 2 increments, decrement. You can imagine this to be really useful for debugging your application. Like, why does my thing say this thing? Oh, here's the entire history. And here's what happened. Oh, I received a decrement object, and then it became 1 and 1. Then it became 2 and 2. Oh, then it became 1 and 3. So you have a whole history of how your applications what's happened in your application. So useful when you're debugging. Right? And it's also really cool if you can use this for beyond debugging. This kind of architecture also lets you do undo, for example. So I could do an undo button, And I wouldn't have to calculate like, oh, the last thing was this. Just it already knows. Like it's already you could have put it all in a list and just pull things off the list. And also the reason why it's thought that Facebook invented this architecture basically to solve messenger problems. So the lab this week will be building a chat application. I don't know if I show you all my chats, but in chat you have like a lot of messages, a lot of state that comes in. So if I download these messages, what should I show? And you can just immediately pop to that like data. So maybe some web applications you might have used, you can kind of hit reload and you just end up in the same place you were before. And that all happens from like good state management using things like Redux. So that's my debugging thing. Cool, okay, so that was an introduction to Redux. You can now build a very simple app using Redux. I want to do a more complicated example today, but I want to give you a quick break by talking about the project. So, back to slides. Any questions about Redux? Actually, I should have asked for questions. Anything people want to know?
So I am shooting discuss about that. And the first thing I think we should not do something like we want action type for a lot of users, like in the example.
Oh, I did kind of make my example a little confusing. But it could happen. I don't know.
And the second thing is for debug, we can use Redux. Dev tool from
Yeah, there are better tools than doing this. Redux dev tools is very good too. So let me type that in real quick. I should put that in the course notes. The tools. This one, I think I have it here. I have it already. Yeah.
we must set up a little bit inside.
So that's
We need time on the wall because
yeah. You can step back and forth, right?
What would be a reason not to use Redux in your React?
That's a good question. It should not be because you don't understand it. It's a bad reason to not use it. No, I think there are, even when you use Redux, so if you're very fanatical about it, you'll never use this .set state. Everything will be an action that you dispatch, and then it becomes very easy to track everything. However, I would say if you're too fanatical about it, as with anything, your code will become kind of hard to read. Like, some state doesn't need to be globally available. So a good example is if there's one component that maybe highlights itself or doesn't highlight itself based on if the mouse is there or not, you shouldn't be dispatching an action all the way up to saying, hey, like now, mouse pointer moved. Have that propagate, that'll just make things noisy. So there's some cases where it's not worth the complexity. But overall, would you use it, would you not use it? I think you would basically use it all the time. And most people, I would say, do. But as with anything, adding a library adds extra complexity. So if you don't need it, if you don't think your application is complicated, then don't use it. Cool. Yes, ma'am.
If in one line I have two components that have to do include an action, so how can the index differentiate that which state is of which component?
I see. So the question is, if I have multiple components kind of accessing the same piece of data, perhaps, how do I know where it comes from? Or it's like, how do I deal with which state? So the question you ask, which state, is a good question, I think. So you might have this idea that there's multiple states or multiple components kind of attaching the same thing. In Redux, you only have one state. Like everyone's looking at the same object, and everyone's dispatching objects to the same place. Or sorry, dispatching actions to the same place. So I always send actions to the store, and the store is global amongst all components. And no matter what happens, no matter who sends me an action, I always do the same thing. It doesn't matter if, press button, increment button, decrement button, whatever it is, I just look at the action type and I know exactly what to do. And then whoever's reading from this will automatically get an updated copy of the new state. Be like, oh, now I know what to do, or I know what to display, or what behavior to have. So everything is in sync because there's only one copy of data. And as soon as that updates, everything else, the changes filter down automatically. I hope that answers your question. It doesn't look, you don't look satisfied. Okay, I can come find you after, in just in a minute. Let me follow up with you on that question. Okay. Is there anything, I feel like I'm missing. Anything else missing, John? Anything else about Redux that you want to share?
Yeah, I think the one problem with Redux is something like in the code, you got inside a project for a long time, and after that, one guy involved in the project and don't know what we should put inside the state. Like it should be some number, but this guy put it inside, put the text inside the state. That is the problem of the Redux and the script.
Okay, I mean, you can abuse any tool. You could use it incorrectly. I think maybe if you use Redux, you have to be coordinated on what your overall state should look like. So you should separate it nicely. Like maybe one downside of having one global state for everything is you can get it really messy and polluted. So you shouldn't do that. You should use, that's why we have this combined reducers. So maybe basically like, oh, counter stuff stays here. Press stuff stays here. In real life, this would probably look more like user reducer. And then like this would be like card reducer. And most people like, card stuff would only play with this stuff. And these would be separate files that were pretty big and complicated. If you have more questions, I'll be around. But I think that I like what you guys got. So, okay, so for group discussion today, I want to talk about the projects that we'll do. So this is week 4. Next week we'll have one more week of material, which is going to be in React. We're going to go back to React Native and try to apply some of these things we learned about Redux and Advanced React back to React Native and teach you just a little bit about just device-specific stuff. So how to use maps, how to use a camera, kind of thing. But we want you in week 6 to kind of stay at home or come to the office, whatever you want, but to build a project for the class. Something that shows the world, hey, I learned React in React Native through Coder School. So this is a slide from the first day of class. I said there are 3 options for this final project. You can create a new project or create an app. That's what I would say the recommended thing is. That's a lot of fun. Making an app with a partner is super fulfilling to see your app work. Anyone who's been through Coder School knows that's fun. But we also want to do 2 new things, which is we can give you an opportunity to write a post, to like write a tutorial about something, teaching something about React. So if there's something that you thought was hard to understand, and you want to help future people learn that thing, it's a great way to share that information with future generations. Or you can polish an existing homework assignment. We've seen some really good homework assignments, but also in the past, students always come to me and say, oh, I could have done so much better in the assignment if I had more time. So this is your chance to actually, if you actually think that, then this is your chance to really work on that. And just why we're doing this is that you heard Jiren talk about this. We want to make great software engineers at Coder School, and we thought this opening up in more ways would help kind of appeal to different types of engineers. As you become an engineer in your career, you should figure out the things you're good at, things you're bad at. You're a front-end guy, full stack person, back-end person, whatever you like doing, deployment. Also, I thought that there are different ways to produce great work. So building your own project, I think, is the most fun, but it's best suited for people who like to create new things, who have lots of ideas. But there are other ways to be a great valued engineer. Writing great documentation is probably the easiest way to be someone that everyone loves at your company, that people don't do enough. But being a good documentation person is a really good way to stand out. But also improving existing things. So by polishing a homework assignment with one of your partners, that's also an important skill. Because as you build projects, and as you're doing your homework, you've probably all seen, the first half is very easy. You can get 50% done very quickly. Then the next 20, it gets like exponentially harder. The first 50 is easy, the next 25% is twice as hard, the next 12.5% is 4 times as hard. The curve goes like this. So it's really also a good skill to be able to get farther and farther down to the 100% polished stage. But for discussion today, I want to have people talk about in groups what kind of projects they want to build. So these are ideas that you're interested in. So we'll split the class up into groups of, I guess, 4, 4, 5 here. And just, I would say, introduce yourselves to each other, but also say, hey, here's a few ideas. I want each group to come up with 4 ideas, and you'll present it to the class about 4 ideas that you think are potentially interesting. You don't have to work on this, like it's not a contract that you have to work on these, but just talk to your teammates about interesting ideas and get an idea of what people are interested in. And the reason we do this is 1, so you can come up with good ideas together and discuss things. That's how good ideas happen. But 2, I'll also ask you later this week to pick some teammate preferences. So we have a little survey where you say, oh, I'd like to work with this person, this person, this person. I would not like to work with this person. So that's also an option, it's fine. So we'll assign groups based on this. Based on our class size, I think we'll have teams of, I think we can do teams of 3. But we may, if you want to do a team of 2, it's fine as well. But my pitch to you guys, sorry.
So what happens if someone picks the I want to teach a concept thing?
Yeah, so if you want to do that, then just talk about it in class, talk about it now, and you can pitch that as one of the 4 ideas as well.
Wait, so you have to convince your whole...
No, so this is just, you talk amongst each other and present 4 interesting final project ideas. So so I'm saying there are probably going to be new products to build, but if you want to talk about teaching something, then you should bring that up too. See what people think. Some people might be like, oh, that is really hard. I would love to see a good tutorial about that. There's this, who is it? It's Anne Frank has this quote saying, be the change that you want to be, right? But the computer science version of that is, be the article that you wished was #1 result on Google when you searched for that thing. So be the Stack Overflow answer or the blog post that you wish you had found. And just some quick guidelines on the product idea. We have lots of resources on this, but just hopefully you can explain it very simply. It's interesting. It's not like, I want to build a search engine. I mean, it's like something different and something that people use frequently. So it's something that I can see myself using every day or close to every day. So I'll give you 20 minutes to discuss this. But actually before that, I want to introduce Evelyn. So she's visiting from Singapore, but she has one thing that she might talk to you guys about. So who here either enjoys this Coder School class or has enjoyed our previous Coder School class? Raise your hand if you like Coder School.
Who enjoyed?
No, who has enjoyed a Coder School class? Who is enjoying this class or maybe has enjoyed the previous class? Good. Good. No, I'm asking that question because on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday this week, we're going to be scheduling, we want to take some video interviews of students past and present and have them talk about, hey, like what they thought about Coder School, because we're trying to make some more marketing materials for our website. And Evelyn is in charge of scheduling you. So if you have time on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and you'd like to tell the world about how great Coder School is, you can talk to her and she'll get your contact information and try to schedule a good time for you.
Wait, no, I won't let you leave a message like that.
It's completely optional. If you don't like us, we don't want you coming because you don't want bad video on us anyway. So it's okay. But yeah, okay. So group discussion time, please.
So you probably already started in